Before we get started with today's episode, I want to let you know about our current Design Her Travel newsletter. It is where we share all of the behind the scenes of the episode, my own personal stories, and travel tips that can help you travel longer for less or create the life of your dreams. It really is a place to connect even more deeply with Design Her Travel, and I would love for you to hop on our weekly newsletter. I won't spam you with daily email, but I will send you one beautiful newsletter a week. So if you are interested, then click the link in the show notes and get started now. I will see you there.
If you were going to die in a month, what would be your biggest regret? And it was pretty clear to me that this big adventure, that would definitely be my biggest regret if I died.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Design Her Travel podcast. I'm your host, Kim Anderson. As an avid traveler, global nomad, and someone who considers himself a citizen of the world, I want to say welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. My hope in creating this podcast is to inspire you to take the leap of faith and to design the life of your dreams. For me, that includes connecting with like-minded individuals and creating a community of souls living their best lives out in and around the world. Each week, you'll hear stories and conversations from fellow travelers who have figured out how to incorporate travel as a key component in their daily lives. Their stories are beautiful and inspiring, just like you. I can't wait to go on this journey with you. So let's do this. Here we go. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to today's episode of the Design Her Travel podcast. I'm your host, Kim Anderson. I hope you are ready for an adventure, and I can't wait for you to hear today's episode. Today is a conversation that is full of adventure and really just living life full out, for having a dream and for being brave enough to say yes to it. And today I have on the show Charlie Reynolds, and Charlie is currently riding and adventuring on the Pan American Highway, riding his motorbike from Canada all the way to Ushuaia in the very bottom of Argentina. It is something like 30,000 kilometers, and he is doing it on a motorbike. He is a fantastic storyteller. He is on some massive adventures, and our conversation is full of inspiration. So without further ado, let's dive in. Here is Charlie Reynolds. Hello, Charlie. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, how's it going?
Yes, it's awesome. And so where are you currently in the world? Where are you coming to us from?
So right now I'm at an interesting place called Donkey Sunrise, which is a hub for adventure motorcyclists based in South Colombia.
So Donkey Sunrise is an actual place, or it's like a gathering?
So it is a place. It's run by a guy called Tim, who is Dutch, and he owns like a series of cabanas and A-frame cabins sort of in an area near to a town called La Union. Once a month, they have events for meetups for adventure motorcycle riders. So I came here a few days ago for a Thanksgiving dinner, and there was about 10 or 12 other riders here from all over the world who are traversing the continent. So we got to kind of enjoy a meal and meet each other and stuff like that. So it's a great place.
That's awesome, because I would imagine, as a motorcyclist, that sometimes you're by yourself. So it's nice to hook up with other people that are on the same kind of adventure.
You're definitely on your own a lot, but it's 50-50 whether I enjoy meeting up with or riding with other people more than being on my own. I sort of learned to enjoy being on my own, and the benefits of traveling on your own are not to be underestimated.
Yes, I would have to agree with that. I traveled a lot solo. And so it was many years before I actually traveled with anyone. I was like, oh, this is like a totally different thing. So I like that 50-50. Like sometimes it's great and sometimes it's so great to just be with ourselves. So that's awesome. That's your experience too. And so let's talk a little bit about, there are adventures in the world, and then there are massive adventures like riding a motorbike from Canada to the very bottom of Argentina. So where were you in life, and what made you decide that this is the adventure that you want to do?
I guess the Pan America Highway is sort of like, if a journey can be a destination, it is like a dream destination for adventurers, just because I think the continental North and South America is so big. It's so nicely presented on the map. There's one end at the top, there's another end at the bottom. There's a whole load of countries and culture and mountains and lakes and just crazy stuff in the middle to experience. And then you've got this the Pan America Highway, which is supposedly, I think some people call it the longest highway in the world. I think there's some disputes of that claim, but it's essentially a route that goes all the way down. There is obviously a break in the middle for the Darien Gap, but it just seems to be this mecca of an adventure for adventure enthusiasts. And I'd always been into cars when I was younger. And combined with that, I'd always, I guess, been on slightly more adventurous holidays or trips, both with my parents. And then I sort of became the initiator of those kind of trips with my friends. So as opposed to just going somewhere on a holiday, jumping on a plane, finding a hotel, it would be like, we're going to buy this car on eBay and we're going to drive it to Greece. Or it would be like, we're going to pack our bikes into boxes, we're going to fly them to Croatia, and then we're going to cycle to the north of Croatia. Or, we're going to buy a school bus in Canada and we're going to drive it down to LA. And it was always, we were always right up against it for time because we were dealing with allocated holiday from our companies. So we were time poor, and I guess I just always had ambition to go on these big trips where things could go wrong. That was what I was aiming for. I'm not sure I would pitch my friends with that idea, but they're always big and wacky and weird and a bit different. And I would always there was one year, I think, where we did something else, like we went to Tomorrowland instead of the annual adventure. I remember thinking that I was really disappointed with the fact that we'd done something that was too organized for me. So I guess I've always just enjoyed this idea of unorganized fun. And when I moved to Canada from the UK, so I was living in London, moved to the UK, my love for cars sort of turned into a love for the type of cars they have out there. So I got more into four-wheel drive vehicles and using those to explore the backcountry and the Forest Service road network that we have in British Columbia. And my horizon just kind of kept expanding from there, wanting to go further in the car. I was making everyone leave work at lunchtime on a Friday, and they would be getting home at 10 p.m. on a Sunday, just totally exhausted. And it was always more. I always wanted to do something bigger. And so driving to Ushuaia, which is the most southern town in South America, and I believe in the world, which is hopefully my destination, is where I'm going to end up. That was always something I wanted to do in a four-wheel drive vehicle, is how I envisioned it. That's not quite how it turned out. But yeah, the vehicle has never been that important to me. It's more about the experience of the journey. So I sort of switched vehicles for various reasons.
It sounds like you've done all kinds of adventures on different vehicles. And I love that was one of the pieces of your adventure, is always a different mode of transport. And so was a motorbike always a way that you had adventured, or is this something that's new?
So I had an experience with my ex-girlfriend's dad passing away, which was very sad, but it made me think a lot about life and about, I guess, what I would regret most if I died. And my partner's father at the time, he was given a month to live. And so that was the time frame through which I was looking at life. And I was like, if you were going to die in a month, what would be your biggest regret? And it was pretty clear to me that this big adventure, that would definitely be my biggest regret if I died. And I think that experience of spending time with someone who was close to death enabled me to see just that I knew that. It sounds like a very simple thing, but actually it's a very complex thing. And I think as soon as I knew that what my biggest regret would be, I don't think I did it consciously. I sort of made that my one and only, was just to do this trip, because who gets the chance to understand what their biggest regret in life would be, right? It's not every day that someone can just tell you that, because you go, well, why aren't you doing it? The gift is getting to know what it is. And I think once you know what it is, you act on it regardless. It's not about motivation or drive or cans or wills or won'ts. It's just if you get the gift of knowing what that thing is, then it just happens. So in my opinion, that might not be the case for everyone, but I was going to make it happen. And I remember looking at the cost of doing the trip in my Toyota. So I had a 1998 Toyota Land Cruiser Prado. So it's sort of like a 4Runner. You have those in the US, a smaller version of a Land Cruiser. And it was nicely equipped for the trip. But with fuel, with crossing the Darien Gap in the vehicle, because obviously it's got to go on a container ship, and then getting the vehicle back from Argentina. It was a super expensive exercise to do it in the car. I'd always ridden a lot of mountain bikes. I had never ridden a motorbike. And I remember typing in best motorbike to go on an adventure. And I remember typing in the fuel economy of the motorbike. And I just remember copying that fuel economy and pasting it into my spreadsheet. And I remember seeing the price drop by more than half. And I was just like, well, it looks like I'm going on a motorbike. And I remember opening a new tab, and I found there's quite a well-known YouTuber called Itchy Boots, who's a solo female rider, and she rides on a Honda CRF 250L Rally. And I sort of singled that bike out. I decided that for various reasons, as a novice rider wanting to do a big solo trip, it was the best bike. She'd sort of given me the proof that it was able to do it. And I think I bought one a few weeks later, and I basically sold everything I owned to fund the trip, like now. It was quite spontaneous leaving on the trip. It happened in weeks of planning, not months. I can't say that the planning was very useful. I don't really think I knew how to plan for a trip like this, but I sort of just shoehorned everything onto the bike, and then I just left, because I think I will stand by this. Like, leaving is the hardest part and the most important part. You can figure everything else out once you've left. You can plan the whole trip. You can prep for the whole trip. You can fix anything you've done wrong. And it's all so much easier once you've left. But if you just hang around for ages, sort of trying to get everything right, that's, I think, where I did quite well, is I just like hit the road.
Yeah, there is truth in that. A lot of people can look at the preparation as doing something, but really it's just a stalling mechanism. It's just like all you're doing is preparing. You're not actually doing the thing. So kudos to you but I love that you were like, you gave yourself, if I only had a month to live, what is it that I would regret not doing? And here you are, like, actually taking on this adventure in, it sounds like, just a matter of weeks. So even a month, you're like, I can do this whole thing. So that's commendable, because a lot of people will kind of drag their feet. So that's awesome. So I would imagine that you have learned a lot about what you need, what it takes to have this adventure. Has it been easier or harder in that regard? Like, did you end up needing a lot of things that you hadn't considered, or how is it on that front?
So I guess my big concern was that I was going to get robbed, or my bike wasn't going to be secure. There was all the concerns around that. And like, which do I pick boxes for my motorbike, which are lockable, or do I pick soft bags, which are lighter, but they're less secure? Anyway, it turned out that a lot of these things are really like non-problems. And a lot of the things that I did worry about before the trip, I won't go into like specifics, but essentially a lot of the things that I kind of stayed awake thinking about were just things that didn't really exist as a problem. And a lot of the things that I did find were difficult on my trip were, just because I'm alone on the trip and I am the only person on the trip, the most difficult part of the trip is being responsible for everything, and not just being responsible for making it happen, but being responsible for it when it doesn't happen or when you make a mistake. Not planning when your meals are going to be, not planning when you're going to get fresh water, not picking a route that is safe or goes through a safe area, or not learning enough Spanish. Like, these are all my responsibilities, and I'm a team of one. And I guess, even though my goal was just to hit the road, a lot of what I worried about before the trip wasn't, oh, I should learn Spanish, or I should work on my like routing skills. It was all like, I need to buy this, I need to buy that, so I'm safe. So I bought a lot of like lock security devices and stuff, which I essentially threw away. But yeah, I would describe the trip. I'm obviously still on the trip. It's a trip of two halves. I mean, physically and metaphorically. I was actually hit by a truck in Costa Rica at the beginning of May. And that, plus a few other reasons, made sense for me to return to Canada for a few months for the summer, because I couldn't really ride properly. I was applying for my Canadian permanent residency, and I had a wedding to go to. So the stars aligned for me to take a break from the trip. And I would describe the first half of the trip as being like a bit of a struggle. There's a lot to think about, a lot of energy expenditure, and nobody else to pull up the slack. And coming back to the trip, I found it like totally different, a refreshing break from society. And I was still able to do all those difficult things and do all the planning side of things. But it was, for some reason, it seems within me now. It seems, and maybe that's because my setup has been refined, or my mindset has been refined, but it certainly feels a lot easier now than it did when I left.
I can only imagine, that is one of the hardest parts about traveling solo in general, is that all of the logistics are up to you, all of the negotiation, all of that is up to you. So sharing some of that responsibility can ease I don't want to use burden, but can ease the responsibility a lot. Because something I am really interested in is the logistics, because so people definitely need to check out your Instagram account, because you are not riding on a highway. You are literally in these crazy, like, river crossing roads or dirt bike paths. Like, you are in insane locations. So how do you know the safety? Like, if you were to give them a safety level, how do you find this information out, and how do you plan where you are going?
So I will say Instagram is Instagram. There are still highways. Everything is connected with highways. But yeah, I think most riders who are on a bike like mine, on a trip like mine, the dream is to ride as much dirt as possible. And for me, especially, I'm interested in mines. I'm interested in towns with very high elevations. Generally, just like inhospitable places, I seem to find fascinating. Roads that have a propensity to be washed out or have large elevation gains or drops. And generally, you're looking for huge geological features like canyons, big ridge lines to ride along, things that just make you feel small. So that essentially is what I look for. And it's quite simple. Like, obviously I speak to people who are on the road, and sometimes I will get a GPX file, which I can put into my app, which is Gaia, which is what I use for everything. And a lot of the time, I actually made a rule a year ago or so that when I sit on the toilet and I look at my phone, I only look at Gaia and at my maps as opposed to anything else. So I sort of will like spend this time like poring over Ordnance Survey maps of like Bolivia, and I'll be looking at contour lines and roads that get very switchbacky and looking at the color of the road and how big the road is supposed to be. I will put a pin there. So my map is entirely covered in pins. And as I get closer to these destinations, I might ask a local, what's this road like? What's that road like? Do you know another route that is dangerous but fun, is something that I will say. So it's something that I think can fit the bill. And you have to be careful who you ask, because sometimes, well, you just have to pick someone who's on the same level as you, I guess, to get that information from. So I find motorcycle tour companies are quite good for this kind of information. Other riders are quite good for this information. But at the end of the day, if you get good at spotting these roads on the map, you see small roads that zigzag across the tops of mountains and they head to the small towns or to the middle of nowhere. And honestly, usually those roads where there's nothing there, those are the best places to go.
Yes, that is the beauty of having a small vehicle that's able to cover a lot of terrain, is that you can get into the little corners of the globe that aren't really accessible to everyone. So definite perk on that. You're going to be like a genius map reader at the end of all of this.
I'll either be really good at reading maps or I'll be really good at riding really bad roads, because I'm not good at reading maps.
I would like to ask a little bit about safety, though, because you touched on it. Like, you got hit by a vehicle. So taking on an adventure like this, safety is always a concern. But now that you're in on it, do you have like a contingency plan? What sort of safety do you have in place if things really do go south?
This is a really tricky question, because, again, this is something that you think about when you're at home before you leave on the trip. And, you buy great insurance and you go and buy, people have a spot device, a satellite device. Like I have a Garmin InReach messenger, which can send text message via satellite. And it also has an SOS button, which goes to a 365 days a year global response team. And, I think at the start of my trip, my dad said something like, you've got to send me all the emergency numbers of all the countries in advance. And you have all these plans, but when you get to these places, you really do learn. And I'm going to bring up a case study here, which is a friend of mine, Luke. Now, Luke, I don't know if you know Luke's story, but Luke was riding in Colombia. And about a month after I had my crash, he had a pretty nasty crash. I got a call from him while he was in hospital. I knew he'd had a crash. I didn't know how bad it was. And he told me on that call that he was about to have his left leg amputated. That kind of crash, it doesn't really matter what the crash is. The crash can happen. Luke had great insurance. Luke had a satellite device. Luke had all these things in place. But at the end of the day, if you're riding through a remote area with relatively few resources, which rural Colombia definitely is, it really doesn't matter if you push the button or if you have a plan. The best thing that you can do in terms of a plan is to really moderate your riding for the conditions and for how remote you are. So aside from that, once you come off the bike, you really have no idea what's going to happen, if you're going to be conscious, if someone's going to find you. And when you do push that button, some of the areas you're riding are so remote there was a rider who pushed their Garmin SOS button on what's called the Lagunas route, which goes between Bolivia and Chile. And it took him about 18 hours to get someone to come and help him. And that was a small truck. So he sat in the back of a pickup truck with a broken collarbone. So I have great insurance. I have great satellite devices. I have a telephone full of contacts. And hopefully, if I do have an accident, I'll be able to use one of those to, help myself. But really, it is like that throttle hand just needs to behave itself when we know that we're in a situation where it's difficult for me to be helped. That really is the only thing that's going to save my ass. In a way, that does bring in like this whole other level of responsibility and has a bit of a thrill to it as well. So I think that's part of the appeal of these trips at the same time, is that, even sometimes, even if someone did want to help you, it's up to you, really, a lot of this stuff.
I love that, that safety comes down to that responsibility of yourself, like if you're riding in a really crazy terrain, then don't go crazy, like do what you can do. Because it doesn't matter, any adventure sport, anything in life comes with an element of danger, or, like anything can happen at any time. So do what we can and then trust in the rest, I suppose. Something you said on your Instagram at some point, and I loved it. I'm pretty sure I commented when you wrote it, but you were talking about you're experiencing true freedom. And you said you're taking absolute responsibility for your life. And that is not something that everyone in this day and age especially gets to experience. It's living full out. It's knowing that you are responsible. It's trusting in the process in whatever way that shows up. In that experience, I can only imagine that you are not the same person as when you started. And I know that you're only a portion of the way into your journey, but how has that changed who you are already?
So, okay, it's interesting that you brought that up. That was something that I think I said when I was on my trip across the Darien, which I guess we'll talk about in a minute. I don't think, as risky and as responsible for my life as I am on the motorcycle trip, I would not consider the two elements of those two sections of my adventure. I don't have the same responsibility of my life on the motorcycle trip as I did in the canoe. The interesting thing about the canoe was there's no Coast Guard. There's no one else in boats around in that area. There really is nobody to help. If I fall off my motorcycle and I'm unconscious, most of the time there's going to be a vehicle, especially in, somewhere like Colombia, there's a lot of farms and houses on all the small roads. Someone's going to find me and then it's their responsibility. Even if I'm an unconscious body, it was just a very interesting difference to me that I thought I was on this big dangerous adventure when I was on the motorcycle. And when I stepped back canoe, it was definitely very different. But in terms of me and change, there was another moment on the canoe trip where something definitely did occur to me in what I would describe as a dangerous situation. I took some advice of a local fisherman, and using the weather forecast I had available to me, I made a decision to make a go at a certain section of the trip that was quite dangerous. And it turned out that it was a really bad day to do that. And I guess I was very scared. I was in the boat on my own for about 9 hours in sort of 2 to 3 meter waves. And there was this version of me who, he looks the same as the day I left on this adventure, who very much was playing the victim. The sun had come out and I was wearing shorts. So I was getting too much sun. And that was a problem because I needed to get something from the front of the boat, which is very unstable. And I wasn't comfortable going to get it. I wasn't comfortable going to get my trousers and my sun cream. And then things like my water in my small bottle had run out. So I would need to get my big water jug. Again, a very difficult task in rough water, very scary. I needed to get it and fill up my other water. And there were just all sorts of excuses I was making as to why I couldn't do these things. And at some point I did realize that if I fell out of the boat and I was dehydrated and I had not eaten enough and I'd not put on sun cream and I had sunstroke, I wouldn't be able to swim and I would die. And I started thinking about which friend, like a sort of fantasy, which friend I would have if I could have one friend join me now, because there was 2 seats in the queue. I was looking at the other seat and I was thinking, if I could have one of my friends sit in this second seat right now, who would it be? Who would rescue me? And I remember thinking like, oh, he's a strong guy. Like he could help. Like he would know what to do. Like he'd be able to do this. And at the end of it, I remember thinking about the person that I thought about being there. And I said, like, would he pick me if he was in the same situation? And then I remember thinking, like, would I pick me? Like if I could bring a second me along, how would that affect the situation? And I thought to myself, if I could pick anyone, it would probably be me. if I could pick one more person. And so this weird thing happened where I sort of pretended that was the case. And I sort of pretended that another version of me had arrived, but he was very pragmatic and very brave, and he knew exactly what to do. And so there was sort of this one version of me who was the victim, and there was this one version of me who was the cavalry. And I was even saying to myself, I said, don't worry, I'm here now. And I kept repeating that to myself as I was scrambling around the front of the boat with waves coming over the side, as I was pouring the water from the jug into my bottle and drinking it every 100 paddle strokes. I was putting sun cream onto my face, which was soaking wet with seawater. I would have looked like I was a mess. I didn't have enough sugary bars. And this pragmatic version of me just said, you've got a bag of ketchup, like a big bag of ketchup, just drink the ketchup. So it was this amazing moment where it was still me. I was still capable of doing all these things, but I'd been, I guess, filtered into this weakened down version of myself by fear. And I think what the fear did was it actually forced me to bring out this other version of myself that was sort of acted as the cavalry and came to save me, which I thought was a really interesting concept. I've sort of been reading a little bit more about that concept in mythology, different philosophers and stuff since then, because it's something that interests me.
And the beautiful part about that is that you can call on the cavalry at any point in time in life. And I think when you get to the neurolinguistic programming, all the NLP and stuff, you just rewrote your nervous system to be able to create safety within yourself. And so that's great because now you can always call on that.
Totally, yeah.
So let's tell people a little bit about your trip on the Darien Gap, because you're not just doing this amazing motorcycle adventure. You decided to take your adventure a little bit further. So give people a little bit of the backstory and what it is that you actually did and why you have to have a different method of transportation for the Darien Gap itself.
Okay, so between Central America, and Central America is Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Costa Rica, and Panama. Shock horror, Mexico is in North America. I don't think many people know that, but I have to just tell people because anyway, so you've got North America, you've got Central America, which ends with Panama, and then you've got South America, which begins with Colombia. Now, between Panama and Colombia, there is an area of dense jungle, and it is run by cartels and drug smugglers and human traffickers, and it's a very nasty place to be. There's no roads that go through. It's known as being the most dangerous jungle in the world. Whether that's colloquial or whether that's factual, I'm not sure is particularly relevant, but it was a very exciting place to somebody who grew up as a little boy who always wanted to go to the place they were told they could not go. So being on this adventure, that was always a hurdle that I knew I would have to cross. Neither myself nor my motorbike are able to go through it with any particular ease. My initial plan was, I guess, slightly more adventurous than what the majority of people do, which is to find a series of small boats from Panama to Colombia, which takes a few days and can be a little bit risky. There are a few riders who have seen their boat sink. They lost their bike at the bottom of the ocean. They've gone scuba diving, looking for equipment. It can be a little bit sketchy. And I didn't have a concrete plan for this. I don't know if it's possible to have a concrete plan, but as I got closer and closer to the Darien Gap, ideas sort of started to develop. And it was actually when I was in Mahual in Mexico that I met two very brave guys from Venezuela who had come through the Darien Gap on foot. So they left Venezuela hoping to get to Mexico. And they told me these amazing and horrific stories of crossing the Darien Gap and just the difficulty of it. And I think when they told me like it was a bad thing. But there was a part of me that sort of envied that meant so much to them, that journey. And arriving in Mexico, whether they appreciate it or not, was such a huge achievement, partly because it was such a difficult thing that they had to overcome to arrive. And I guess I sort of wanted that for my transition from Central to South America. I wanted some kind of struggle that would give me that feeling of accomplishment when I arrive in South America. And I wasn't sure that stepping off of, you can charter a yacht, but certainly a plane would have given me that feeling that I experienced from these guys who were sat, having lived in Venezuela, wanted a better life, and now they were gobbling down beers in Mexico and loving their life. So I wanted to gobble down beers the way that they were gobbling down beers. And I got to thinking, I remember researching about small boats. I found a blog of a guy, I cannot remember his name, and it was something like 2014, and he had done it with a friend in 2 sea kayaks. And I don't think that is too uncommon that people do it in sea kayaks. But I saw this blog. There were two guys. They'd done it in about 12 days. And from there on, after seeing their pictures of the Sandblast Islands and the white sand, they essentially, what they did, for the sake of the people who don't know, they went to the east coast of Panama, sort of the northeastern coast, and they paddled. It's about, as the crow flies, it's about 250 kilometers. But if you're following the coast and you're kind of weaving in and out of the islands, for me, it ended up being closer to 350 kilometers. And you go down, you go past the Darien Gap, this kind of roadless jungle. You follow the Darien Gap down and you arrive in a place called Cartagena, which is in Colombia, which is the most northern town in Colombia. And that is you then in South America. And I was just totally set on this idea. But when I'd been looking at their blog, I had seen in the background all these other canoes, which the locals use for fishing, which is called a cayuco. So it's a dugout wooden canoe. I'd never seen one in my life with my real eyes. I'd never been in one. I just saw the locals using them. And I thought, well, if the locals use them there, then surely I can use them there as well. And I did actually, after doing some more research, I did find a story of another two guys who had done it in 2016 or something. They'd gone together in a dugout canoe over about 3 weeks. So I knew it could be done. And I remember telling a few of my good friends, this is my plan. I think I'm going to try and buy one of these dugout canoes and paddle from Panama in Central America around the Darien Gap to Colombia in South America. And both of the two friends I told said, that's crazy. You shouldn't do it. I know you're a bit wild, but let's draw a line under that one and just say it's a bit too adventurous. And I remember getting on my motorbike that day and I rode into Belize. And when I got off the motorbike that day, my mind was made up that I was doing it because I had not stopped thinking about it since the moment I got on the bike. So I messaged my friends back and I said, I think I'm doing it. And they said, okay, whatever. And that was the seed planted.
And for anyone who hasn't seen, like, this canoe it looks heavy and the gunnels are really low. So it's not like it seems to be quite tippy. So yeah, I would imagine did it take a while to get used to?
Yes. So the first time I went in the canoe was when I bought one. So I traveled to this island called Cati Sogdo, which, by the way, was after my break in Canada. And the feeling of being dropped on this kind of inhabited desert island right after having a 3-month break in sort of like a nice comfy bed in Canada was quite overwhelming. I came up with the idea for this trip while I was on an adventure. And so the step up to the canoe adventure didn't seem like a huge leap. But once I'd been home and I'd had all the home comforts, it seemed like a horrendous idea to be doing this. Anyways, I'm dropped off on this desert island, inhabited desert island, covered in kind of metal corrugated roof shacks. I'm offered to stay with this guy called Agua. That's his Guna tribe name. And he offered to help me find a canoe. So we went to see a few different canoes. I eventually found one that had only a few leaks in it. I went to test it. I was with another guy at the time who was riding his bicycle down to Argentina, who just happened to have got on the same boat as me. And he thought it was interesting. He came to look at the canoe with me as well. He was getting a series of speedboats. And I was with Agua, this guy who was helping. And they both got into the canoe as well. And as you said, the sides of the canoe sit about 5 to 6 inches above the water. So with 3 people in there, it sits about 4 inches above the water. And this thing was so tippy, I think the blood drained out of my face when I took the first paddle stroke because I was scared. It was, I used to be a rower, so I'm used to these skinny fiberglass boats that are very difficult to balance. And I thought, it doesn't matter how tippy it is, I will have experienced something tippier. But getting into this boat with these two guys, I really had a moment where I thought, like, what is going on now? Like, why are we doing this? Because it's a very heavy boat and it is very unstable and it is just very unsuited to the type of journey that I was about to take it on.
But you made some modifications, right, to make it work for you, because otherwise it seemed like it might have been just a bit too much to try and do it in the original fashion.
Yeah. So for a few reasons, I decided to add a sort of makeshift outrigger. One reason was obviously I didn't want to capsize and fall out myself. And I just figured, if I add one, I can always remove it. But I guess I could have left without one and built it either way. Leaving is the most important part. But yeah, I figured I would just feel better, even if it was just for the first few days, having this outrigger. I did end up keeping it for the entire trip. I didn't see the need to get rid of it, but it was basically a big piece of bamboo that went over across the top of the canoe. And I attached 2 5-gallon water tanks to that bamboo. And I could either have them spun upwards so they wouldn't be touching the water, and that would allow me to travel a bit faster. Or if I was sailing, because I did make a sail, then the boat could tip slightly as it does when you're sailing and they wouldn't touch the water. If I was in really rough water, I could spin the bamboo 180 degrees and they would touch the water, which would make the boat very secure. That was one of the modifications I did, which was a bit of a peace of mind thing. The other reason I did that was I was initially planning to tie all of my worldly possessions into the canoe in case there was an accident. But the idea of being tangled in all of the ropes of all these things, because I had about 6 or 7 items to tie down, sort of scared me a little bit more than the idea of losing some things. So in the end, I decided not to tie anything down, go with the outrigger, and just try and fish things back into the boat if I needed to, if anything fell out. So I did that. I also painted the boat. I painted it red, yellow, and green, which is the Guna tribe colors. But I think most people would probably say it's a Rastafarian boat. And then I added a sail. So the sail it has 2 booms if you're into your sailing terms, but it's basically a mast that goes into the boat. I can take it down when there's no wind. And then there was a big piece of canvas attached to the mast with 1 boom at the bottom and 1 boom sort of pushing the top of the sail up. And then obviously I had a rope attached to that, which I would use to pull the sail in and out. So those were my modifications. Oh, and I wrapped some yoga mat around the feet because they were really uncomfortable.
And so how long did it take you to complete that journey in the Cayuco? Is that the word?
It's a Cayuco, yeah. So that took 21 days.
Oh, wow. That's like, for anyone, I've traveled the world by sea, so I know what it's like being on the water for periods of time. So 21 days in the vessel that you're in, like that's a pretty significant chunk of time.
Yeah, I was lucky, I think, because I was in a Cayuco and I was traveling mostly between sort of remote islands, desert islands, the stuff out of your wildest dreams, just beautiful white sand beaches with palm trees and blue water. But often when I wasn't in those spots, or if I saw a storm coming, I would try and make my way to one of the Guna tribe villages, which are dotted along the coast. So these are like more of these inhabited desert islands. Obviously, there's no cars, there's no motorbikes. There's just people living in corrugate roof huts with cayucos, and they live off the sea. Really, really interesting people. But I was lucky that whenever there was a storm, or if I needed a day to rest, usually somebody would let me stay in their hut in a hammock or just sleeping on the floor. So I did have a few days off the water in that 21-day period.
Nice. And so you've now reconnected with your bike. You're in Colombia. And do you have a timetable? Like, how did you give yourself a time frame for this adventure, or are you just kind of winging it?
I am just kind of winging it. There are a few things to consider with timing. The main one, I guess, is the snow and when that comes to the bottom of South America. There is a weather window which riders like to hit. For some reason, I just find myself really getting agitated by the idea of there being like a weather window that I need to get to on this like big, crazy adventure. It sort of feels like a big rule that's kind of guiding my trip. So I'm not going to arrive in the weather window. I'm going to arrive quite late. The risk of that is that there will be snow in Ushuaia when I arrive, and riding a motorbike in snow is not ideal. But, I'm of such a mindset that the idea of studying the tires on my motorbike and arriving in like a sort of blizzard seems quite exciting, maybe even more exciting than arriving on a nice sunny spring day. So we'll see. I have about 4 or 5 months until it starts to get quite stupid to be arriving in Ushuaia, full sort of winter mode. So I'm planning to kind of walk the line as close as I can and spend about 5 months from here heading down South America.
I love it. It sounds like you are down for the adventure no matter what it is. So that's always a good guiding light. And I think, we're getting close on time. So I'd like to ask one more question. And that is, there are a lot of people that have been where you are, where you knew that you wanted to do this grand adventure and you figured out what it is that, you really want to do in this life. But they might be afraid to do it, or they might be hung up in all the details and just not really doing the thing. So what would you say to someone who's in that place and they just can't take the leap? Like, what would you say to them that might help them be able to find the bravery within themselves to actually do the thing?
I would say there's nothing I can say or no specific way of sort of planning it that makes it easy. It's always going to be difficult. You're always going to have like, oh, we're planning to have kids, or we have a dog, or, maybe there's like fears holding you back. There's all sorts of reasons why someone wouldn't want to go. And I'm not even going to tell them that, you have to go because you have to see all these places. Yeah, I'm going to go as spiritual as saying what you're missing out on is a different version of yourself. So there's no magic bullet. Like, leaving's just difficult. You have to do it. You have to make it your number one priority. The same way that you make getting a promotion or starting a business a number one priority, you have to make a trip like this your number one priority. But I would say the number one thing that I would have missed out on, that I don't think people understand they're missing out on, is this isn't a trip of a lifetime for me. That's what I thought it was when I left. I was like, wow, this is a trip of a lifetime. Like, I'll have all these stories to tell my kids, and then I'll come back to doing whatever I was doing before. Like, this is more of a Pandora's box. And whether that means more adventures or it means just being a different person when you come home, the person I am when I have finished this adventure will live a very different life to the person who didn't go on that adventure. And obviously, nothing about that is going to be negative. I don't think you'd meet anyone who goes on an adventure like this and would regret it. But if you could talk to the version of me after this trip, and you can either say, look, you can either keep this version of you, or you can keep the memories from the trip. I would delete the memories from the trip. I would keep the version of me that I'm going to have found once this trip is over, because I think that's the big thing that people miss out on, is understanding how they will change when they experience all of these things.
That's beautiful. The magic of the journey. Yeah. You never know what real adventure you're actually going to find. That's beautiful motivation for people. And that's very well said. And so with that, we can move into the lightning round. And so we just have 4 quick questions. And the first one is, what is a travel tip or inside scoop for your current location? So I know that you are moving around Colombia. And so what's an inside scoop or a travel tip for your current location?
I guess there would be one mandatory, which is there's a lot of bark activity in Colombia in rural areas. A lot of the locals know bark is like the cartel. A lot of the locals know where these guys operate, but it's always best to ask questions about where you're going to make sure that you're not going into some of their territory. And the second one is a bit more fun, and that would be the fincas and haciendas in Colombia. These are sort of like guest houses. They're more like people's homes that have been sort of adapted. It's sort of something like between an Airbnb and like a homestay. But these people cook amazing food, and they have cheap places to stay, and they are everywhere in Colombia. So the fincas are a really cool way to have like an authentic Colombian experience without shelling out lots of money. And you get to sit with your hosts and talk with them and learn a little bit as well, which has been really fun.
That's awesome. And what is that word that you're using?
Finca, Finca.
Oh, okay. Yes. Cool. That's awesome. And then the second question is, what is a book that has inspired you to design this extraordinary life?
This is an easy one. My friend Fraser actually gave me this book when we were living in London together. And I think Fraser's someone who's always understood that I've had this like restless adventurer inside me. And I think he gave me this book in a bit of a teasing way. And it is Rolf Potts, and it is Vagabonding, which is the art of long-term world travel on a shoestring budget. And he gave me this book, and I remember it was like jaw on the floor, like, wow, look how much stuff I'm missing out on. And I think after reading that book, I sort of hatched an idea to drive around the world and then settle in a ski resort in North America. And what we ended up actually doing is I convinced Fraser to move to Whistler, a ski resort in Canada, with me, which is where we both live now. We've actually moved to a different town just down the road called Squamish, but that book is a 10 out of 10 for me, because the effect it had on my life reading that with a desk job in London was absolute. It changed everything. It changed where I was, what I did for a living. I definitely wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I'd not read Vagabonding by Rolf Potts.
You know what I find interesting? I've interviewed over 150 people, and you're actually the first person to mention that book, which I find remarkable. It's such a masterpiece in the world of changing perspective. Yeah. And let's see, question number 3 is, what is something that you always take with you, you never leave home without? And I know that you're currently carrying all of your worldly possessions you need, but on any adventure, what's something that you never leave home without?
I would say there are some pretty good adventures you can have with nothing in your pocket. But if I was going to choose one thing, it's probably going to be I want to say my Leatherman because that's a sensible answer, but I'm actually going to say my drone. I really love the perspective you get when you fly a drone because you become very accustomed to the perspective you have on the ground of your surroundings. You understand the way trees look and the way that light comes up in the morning. And, maybe you've been in a hotel or staying somewhere for a few days and you enjoy it. But this morning I woke up at 5:30. I went and grabbed a cup of coffee. I put the drone up above this place, Donkey Sunrise, in the town La Union. And I discovered it from a whole different perspective. It's set on this floodplain where the floodplain meets the mountains. And there's this like awesome divide between the two kind of terrains, and the town sits in the base of it. And that really, after I bring the drone down, I'm not looking at the screen anymore. It really changes my perspective on where I am, getting that kind of bird's eye view. I really appreciate where I am more, having seen it from that perspective. So that's what I'm going to pick. It's my drone.
Beautiful. And I've seen some of your drone footage and drone shots, and it is amazing. You have some beautiful photography and just beautiful perspectives that you get. So let's see. Question number 4 is, what is on the top of your bucket list for adventures or destinations?
For the future? I think for some reason, I'm not sure why, but the Middle East and the stands like Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, for some reason, that place just seems to be, I follow a few travelers that are there at the moment. The maps aren't right. The roads aren't where they say they are, or there's no roads, or there's just very little known about some of these areas. And the other obvious one would be the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. So I think I talked about this being more of a Pandora's box, this trip, as opposed to what I thought it was, which was initially a once in a lifetime. I do see at some point me doing a trip on the other landmass, being a trip somewhere from China through Mongolia and the Middle East and India and Europe and possibly Africa. But that's the reason so many people love this Pan America Highway is because it really is a simple thing to plan. But the other side, as I like to call it, it really is a mess in a very exciting and cool way. But there's a hell of a lot of stuff over there. And I do think I can see myself in a few years in a different kind of vehicle, sort of discovering things over there, which is a much more difficult trip to do. Lots more currencies, lots more languages, lots more different cultures. But I think the stage will be set after the Pan America Highway.
Lots more adventures. Love it. And then where can people find you or connect with you online?
So there's only one place to find me online because I'm not doing a YouTube or anything like that. It's Instagram, and it's Be More Charles. So that's BE more MORE and Charles.
And I have to say, everyone should check out your account and follow you because you are one of the stories that I look forward to each day when I open the app and I love you're a great storyteller and you really convey your adventure really well. So thank you for taking the time to share it with all of us. And I love all of the adventures that you have coming. So thanks for being brave enough to live this extraordinary life.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Kim.
Yeah. And happy travels. I loved so much about that conversation and such deep inspiration by the wisdom that Charlie shared, and just to hit the lens that he sees the world and he sees himself and he sees adventure. Here are the key takeaways. Number 1, ask yourself, what would you regret most about life if you died in 1 month? What is the one thing that you will regret not doing the most? The gift is getting to know what the answer to that question is. But when you know, then go out and do it. Number 2, leaving is both the hardest and the most important part of any journey. Number 3, when faced with any adventure or situation in life, if you could pick anyone to be with you in that exact moment, who would you pick? Reflecting on the answer to that question might lead to some really important realizations. And if the answer to that question is yourself, then well done. You just might have found a key to life. And number 4, life is always going to be difficult. And there will always be fear. It doesn't matter if it's taking a trip or changing jobs or anything in life. There will always be fear and reasons for not doing it. But the thing to know is that what you're missing out on is a different version of yourself. Who you are at the end of that adventure is not the same person as who you were when you started. As Charlie said, this isn't a trip of a lifetime. This is a Pandora's box, and you never know what magic that might lead to. The quote that I would like to leave you with today is from Theodore Roosevelt. And he said, in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. I think that aligns so well with Charlie's philosophy in life. Getting started is always the hardest part, but once you are on a grand adventure or on a new path or experiencing something new in life, you never know where it will lead. Having the bravery to live your greatest dreams is the best gift that you could give yourself. What you are missing out on is the future version of you. My hope is that you found some inspiration in Charlie's story today and a little faith in yourself to know that you too can do the grand thing and the dream that you have in your heart. We're all given a dream because we are given a life to live it. May you find the bravery to step out of your comfort zone and live your biggest and grandest adventures. If you found inspiration in this story today, then please share. That little act of kindness means a lot and helps more than you know. I'd love to know your key takeaways, so hit me up on Instagram at designhertravel. Until next time, my friends. Thank you so much for showing up and listening to this episode. I know that there are so many things in life that you could be doing right now, and so it means a lot to me that you're here. There are so many more episodes coming your way, so if you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to review and follow us on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone who might like to hear it, please share. Those little acts of kindness mean a lot and help more than you know. I appreciate your time and getting the opportunity to share this moment. I'd love to hear more from you. I'd love to connect, so reach out on social. You can find me on Instagram at Seafaring Wanderer. That's SeafaringWanderer. And then you can join our Facebook group at Design Her Travel Podcast. I would love to connect, hear more from you. Let me know what you'd like to hear more of, places you'd like to hear about, and things you'd like to know how to do when designing your life. So thank you, everyone, and I'll be back soon.